Good morning. This is the second module of second chapter of class 10 economics, sectors of the Indian economy. If you remember, in the first module we have discussed, first of all, we have divided the complete chapter into three parts. We have divided the sectors on the basis of economic activities. According to that, we have divided the sectors into primary, secondary and tertiary. Then we have, on the basis of working conditions of the labor, we have divided the sectors into two, that is organized sector and unorganized sector. And on the basis of the ownership of resources, we have divided the chapter into two, that is private sector and public sector. So in the first part, or in the first module, I have discussed about the definitions of primary, secondary and tertiary sector. And in the last part of the module, we have discussed that tertiary sector is playing a very important role nowadays. So we'll continue our discussion on that. What is the role of tertiary sector and the role of other sectors? So if we come towards the second part of this chapter, on the basis of different kind of economic activities, we have divided the chapter into three parts, that is primary, secondary and tertiary sector. Then in this particular module, I will be starting from this particular point, comparing the three sectors. Which sector is contributing how much in the country's national income, or which sector is contributing how much in the GDP of the country. GDP stands for the gross domestic product. So we will be discussing 2 points, counting of the total production in each sector, and then we will be discussing about the historical changes in sectors. After that, we will be going for the third point, rising importance of the tertiary sector in production. In every developed country, the most important role in its development is played by the tertiary sector. So why nowadays tertiary sector is becoming most important, that we are going to discuss in this particular point, that is rising importance of the tertiary sector in production. Then we will be turning towards our country. In our country, where are most of the people are employed, and how to create more employment for them. So let us start today's chapter. The very first point which we have to discuss today is counting of the total production in each sector. Each sector, as I have already discussed, we have divided the sectors into three, that is primary, secondary and tertiary. So in each sector, that is three sectors. The first one can be the primary, the secondary and the tertiary sector. So the counting of the total production in each sector, that is primary, secondary and tertiary sector. How we count the goods? The very first point is the value of goods and services are used rather than adding up the actual numbers. That is the first point in this. Rather than going for the actual number of goods, we count the value of goods and services. Value means we turn it into money. So why we do this thing? Why we count the value of goods and services rather than counting the actual numbers? Let us take the example. If we are talking about a small economy in which 100 shirts are produced, 100 trousers are produced, 100 pencils are produced, pens are produced, this thing and that things are produced. So when you are going to make finally a list, how much long the list will be? This thing and so on. How much long that list will be? Just think of that our finance minister is presenting the budget in the parliament and he is coming up with that list. How much boring it will be to hear all those numbers, and how many of you will be actually interested in those numbers. So rather than going for the actual numbers, the quantity is multiplied by its price, and that gives you a final amount. The budget is of 1 lakh crore rupees, because all the goods and services will be having some value that will be in the rupees. So whatever is the amount is multiplied by the quantity of that particular product, and that gives you the final number. So the values of goods and services are used rather than adding up to the actual numbers. The second one is the value of goods and services in the three sectors are calculated and then added up. Not every good that is produced and sold needs to be counted. It makes sense only to include the final goods and services. You are going to count only the final goods and services. What do I mean by counting only the final goods and services? Again, I would like to take one example. For example, you are making a shirt. So the very first thing which we have to go for is cotton. So the cotton you have taken, and that was of, let us count, 100 rupees. Cotton was of 100 rupees. Then cotton was converted into thread. So this thread was of 200 rupees. The thread was converted into cloth, and that one was of 300 rupees. The cloth was converted into shirt by the industry, and this shirt was of 500 rupees. And finally it was sold in the shop where we people buy the product, and the shop, the shirt was costing 590 rupees. So how much is the total amount? That is 0, 9 comes 9, 5 and 5 10, 3 13, 15 and 1 16. You mean to say that shirt is costing you 1690 rupees? No. That shirt was available to us in 590 only. This is termed as final goods and services. The value of final goods and services are counted because the amount of the final goods and services already include the amount of all the sectors. This one is said avoiding the double counting. Because if you are going for everyone, you are going for cotton, you are going for thread, you are going for cloth, you are going for shirt, you are going for the shopkeeper's profit, then the figure is giving 1690. But that shirt was fetching only rupees 590. So if we will be going for the double counting, the GDP it is going to give is enormous. And in actual, that much will not be the real amount. That's why we count only the value of final goods and services. So that is the second point. In the first point we have discussed that the value of goods and services are accounted, and in the second point we have taken that the value of final goods and services are counted. Intermediate goods are used up in producing final goods and services. Here all these things, whether it is cotton, whether it is thread, whether it is cloth or whether it is shirt, all these things will be termed as the intermediate goods, which are being used in making the final good, that was the shirt that was available to you in rupees 590. The value of final goods already includes the value of all the intermediate goods that are used in making the final good. The value of final goods and services produced in each sector during a particular year provides the total production of the sector for that year. Again, I will like to say one particular thing, that the final production is not counted in quantity. It is always counted in value. The value of the final goods and services. So that will give you the final value of goods and services produced in that particular sector, and the sum of production in three sectors gives what is called the GDP. Whatever is the outcome of primary sector, secondary sector and tertiary sector in form of value, that is counted, and the total gives you the GDP of that particular country. In India, the mammoth task of measuring the GDP is undertaken by a central government ministry. So this is the way by which the counting of total production in each sector is done. First of all, the final goods and services, the value of final goods and services are counted. The second one, it is counted in value only. The third one, in each sector, whatever is the total amount, that is counted, and then all the three sectors are counted jointly. That gives you the GDP of the country. If we turn towards the next heading, that is historical changes in sectors. Historical changes means the time human being has indulged in economic activities and the present time. In earlier times, human being was mostly indulged in the primary sector. Agriculture is the most basic occupation of the human being because it provides the food, and food is the basic requirement of everyone. So at initial stages of development, primary sector was the most important sector of economic activity. We used only the nature for deriving our necessities, and most important was the agriculture. But a few people were indulged. I will again say only a few people were indulged in service sector also. Whatever excess was produced by the people were taken to other areas where less amount of goods were produced, and this work was done by the traders and they were helped by the transporters. But most of the population was based only on primary sector, that was agriculture. But as the time passed, as the industrial revolution occurred, as more and more people started coming towards the agriculture was getting overburdened and no longer it was providing employment to the people. And then came the industries. Because of the industries, the machines came, and because of the machines, it reduced the number of labor in the agriculture field. So obviously people have to shift towards some other area in search of employment, and that was the rise of secondary sector. Secondary sector means manufacturing, where the primary goods or the primary raw material was turned into the manufactured goods or finished goods. So the second point, over a long time, and especially because new methods of manufacturing were introduced, factories came up and started expanding. Those people who had earlier worked on farms now began to work in factories in large numbers. People began to use many more goods that were produced in factories at cheap rates because the production was very high, so obviously the rates were reduced. When you are making the things with the help of machines, obviously the speed of production becomes very high. If the demand is not there, obviously the prices will come down. So at that time the population was not that much. On the other hand, production was more than enough, so that reduced the prices. This made the secondary sector became the most important in total production and employment, as most of the population was turning towards the secondary sector, and secondary sector was contributing maximum in the production. So in the medieval time, or we can say during the 18th and 19th century, the secondary sector became the most important sector. In the past 100 years, that is in the 20th and 21st century, there had been a further shift from secondary to tertiary sector. With the help of machines, you are producing lots of things, whether it is in the primary sector or whether it is in the secondary sector. But if you want to produce a lot of things in the secondary sector, you require raw material. Raw material will be produced in the primary sector. So now it comes, or the burden falls on the transportation, that they have to take the raw material from the primary sector to the industries. More will be the production in the primary sector, more requirement of transportation. It will be sent to the secondary sector. Secondary sector will produce more goods, and now to sell these goods, you have to take these goods in the market. Again, you require transportation. And the market itself is the part of tertiary sector, where you are going to sell the things. As we have discussed in the previous module, that service sector is something in which production doesn't take place, even then it rises the price of the product. In the secondary sector, the shirt would be produced, that will be costing you 500 rupees. But when this shirt will come to the shop where you are going to buy it, definitely it will cost you 510, 520, 530, 550 or whatever. You have to pay more because it includes the cost of transportation, it includes the profit made by the shopkeeper or the seller. So this one is the tertiary sector. So in the last 100 years, the area which has grown maximum is the tertiary sector. The service sector has become the most important in terms of total production. Most of the working people are also employed in the service sector. But here I would like to give you one particular point, and that is service sector only gives employment to those people who are skilled, educated, and basically you can say skilled and educated. They earn a lot from the service sector. Service sector also provides employment to the unskilled labor, but they are not earning a good income out of the service sector. This is the general pattern observed in developed countries. So if we again revise the historical change in the sector, this one was the first point. At initial time, most of the population was based on primary sector. The most important economic activity came from the primary sector. The second, then came the secondary sector, and in the last 100 years, the shift is towards the tertiary sector. If we move towards the next thing, These are 3 bar diagrams. They are the part of the NCERT book. This one shows the contribution of the 3 sectors. If we come towards the first graph, that is graph 1, GDP, the contribution in GDP by the primary, secondary and tertiary sector, and we have compared the graph of 1973 and 2003. If we compare these graphs in the chapter of globalization and Indian economy, you will study that 1990 was the changing year in Indian economy. Before 1990, our economy was something different. After 1990, we have adopted the new economic policy. Before 1990, it was somewhere we can say it was a time period of stagnation. You can see the overall contribution of primary, secondary and tertiary sector was hardly 30,000 crore rupees. It was hardly 30,000 crore rupees, in which primary sector was contributing the maximum. This color shows the primary. So primary sector was giving the maximum contribution. Then came the tertiary sector and finally the secondary sector. Secondary sector was contributing the least. But overall you can see that only 30,000 crore rupees was the overall GDP in 1973. But in 2003, when the result of globalization have started coming, you can see the major rise in the contribution in GDP. Earlier it was 30,000, now it was coming somewhere 2,10,000 crore rupees. Earlier it was 30,000 and now it was coming somewhere 2,10,000, and the same thing has been noticed in the contribution of the sectors, but there was a major change. Earlier primary sector was the maximum contributor, second number was held by the tertiary sector, but in 2003 you can see the maximum contribution is done by the tertiary sector. The second number of contribution comes from the primary, and the third number, or we can say the equal contribution, is done by the secondary sector. So that is the major change. Earlier the tertiary sector was contributing second number, was standing at the second number as far as the contribution was concerned. Now it is the number 1 contributor. If we come towards the next map, this one is the contribution in the GDP. This one is the contribution in GDP. We see the 1973 graph. Number 1 contributor was the primary sector, second number came with the tertiary sector, and third one was the secondary sector. But if we look at the map of 2003, at the bar diagram of 2003, the number 1 contributor is the tertiary sector, the number 2 contributor is the primary sector, and the third number is by the secondary sector. There are very, if we compare the contribution in employment, here the picture is something different. If we talk about 1973, even at that time the maximum contributor in the sectors of employment was the primary sector, the second one was by tertiary sector, and the third one was by tertiary sector. Even if we talk about 2000, the maximum contributor is primary sector, the second contributor is tertiary sector, and the third contribution is done by the secondary sector. So if we compare the graph of contribution in GDP and if we compare the contribution in the employment we see near about the same trend is there. If we put the grading, the number 1 contributor is primary sector, the second contributor is tertiary sector, and then comes the secondary sector. But in the contribution in GDP, the system has totally changed. Earlier tertiary sector was contributing the second number of amount in the GDP. Now it one is the largest contributor. This one is the change made by the globalization, and that we have learned in the historical changes in sector also, that in the last 100 years tertiary sector is playing the most important role. So if we come towards the next one, let us talk about what is the contribution of tertiary sector and what is its contribution and why it is contributing so much. So the heading, rising importance of the tertiary sector. I have divided this thing into 4 points. The very first point is governments taking responsibility of providing basic services. Basic services can include, for example, water supply. It can be education. It can be health services and various others. Providing all these type of services is the responsibility of government. Even the private sector is there, but the private sector is charging very high for providing these type of services. Because the main aim of the government is the welfare of the people, so government has taken the responsibility of providing these services to the masses, and because the population is very high, so we require a large number of services also, and if the responsibility is of government, obviously this sector is expanding very fast. The second one is the development of agriculture and industry led to the development of services. The simplest thing is, if you are producing more in agriculture, obviously it has to be transported to the markets. It has to be transported to the industry. And the work will be done by transportation. And transportation is the part of tertiary sector. Same way, if industries are getting more raw material, obviously the output will be more, the finished goods will be more, and these finished goods have to be transported to the market. So there will be rise in two things. The first one is the transportation sector is going to rise, and the second thing, the market sector is going to rise. And both these sectors are the part of service sector. So that proves your statement, the development of agriculture and industry has led to the development of services. If we come towards the third point, with the rise of income levels of the people, more and more services were demanded. As there is a rise in income levels of the people, they are asking for more and more services. If you have a look at around you in the area where you are residing, you will see many new shops have emerged in the past 10 to 12 years. The number of restaurants have risen. In most of the cities, the concept of city malls are there. These all are the part of service sector. The restaurants, the schools, the hospitals, city malls and various others. They are not producing anything. They are just providing the services. And who are the people who visit these things? Who have got money. So as the standard of the people will rise, as the living standard of the people will rise, they will be asking for more and more services, and the service sector is going to provide them. And finally, the last one, new services based on information and communication has become essential. We can take example of anything. Let us take the example of mobile services. It is the part of the service sector, and in the last 10 years, mobile networks have risen enormously in our country. It is the backbone of the economy, because if the transportation and communication is not there, obviously it will not be possible for making the production. You will be requiring the transportation to supply the raw material to the industries and supplying the finished goods to the market. And same way you have to go for the communication also. And both of these things are rising enormously because of the contribution of information and communication, which is the part of tertiary sector. So these 4 points, that is rising contribution of government in providing the basic services, rise in the production of agriculture and industry, rise in the income levels of the people, and finally rise in new services that is based on information and communication. All the 4 points have got one thing in common, and that is the rise of service sector. If we come towards the next one, where are most of the people employed? Again, if we remember those bar diagrams, we have taken this in the bar diagrams. In the bar diagrams, we have seen that the maximum contributor in the GDP is tertiary sector. Here you have seen the maximum contribution in 2003 was made by the tertiary sector. Let us come back to this thing. But if you remember, the maximum contribution in the employment is made by the primary sector. So a simple question will arise in your mind, that when most of the people are engaged in primary sector, why it is not contributing the maximum in the GDP? The major problem with the primary sector or the agriculture sector is that it is affected by the disguised unemployment. It is affected, I'm sorry, here it is written employment. It is disguised by the disguised unemployment. Disguised unemployment means situations where people are apparently working, but all of them are made to work less than their potential. If you are using machines to operate the machine, you require only one person. But the output of that machine and that labor will be enormous. If you are having a weaving machine, the clothes which are woven by the machine will be much more than the clothes woven by laborers. If you are having a handloom and you are putting labor over there and you are producing the clothes, the amount of clothes they are going to produce in one day will be much less than by the amount of clothes produced by the machines. So primary sector is engaging lots of people, but overall that affects their working potential. They are not working up to their potential, and result the production is comparatively less. This kind of underemployment, this one is also known as underemployment, is hidden in contrast to someone who does not have a job and is clearly visible as unemployed. If a person is not doing any type of job, you will simply say that this person is unemployed. But if a person is doing some type of job, to you it will seem that this person is employed. But if the person is not contributing up to his potential, according to economics, that person is not totally employed. That person is underemployed, and this one is termed as disguised unemployed. So most of the people who are based in the primary sector are affected by disguised unemployment. If these people are removed from primary sector and taken to the tertiary sector, or if the skills are developed in these people and they are taken to the secondary sector, the contribution of secondary and tertiary sector is going to rise. So, where are most of the people employed? More than half of the workers in the country, that is near about 60%, are working in the primary sector, mainly in agriculture, producing only a quarter of the GDP. Because the things which are produced by the primary sector is just raw material. And obviously, raw material is not going to give you a good money. Wheat is costing you just rupees 10 rupees per kg. But when the same wheat is turned into flour and finally turned into chapati, and when this chapati is sold in a restaurant, that chapati can cost you 3 rupees, 5 rupees, depends upon the type of restaurant it is. If you are taking 1 kg of wheat that is costing just 10 rupees, when this one is converted into flour, 1 kg of wheat will be costing you near about 12 rupees. But when chapatis are made out of the same 1 kg of wheat, let us take the example that 10 chapatis are made out of 1 kg of wheat, and 1 chapati is costing 3 rupees. So overall that is giving you 30 rupees. So that is the change. Because most of the people are engaged in agriculture, they are producing just raw material, and raw material is not the basic requirement. As a consumer, we need finished goods. So finished goods will give you more money in comparison to the raw material. That is the reason why, though most of the people are engaged in agriculture sector, but it is not contributing much in the GDP. In contrast to this, the secondary and tertiary sector produce 3/4 of the produce, whereas they employ less than half the people. Because here more skilled people are required. Sorry. And where more skilled people will be there, less number of labor will be required, but they will be producing more amount of goods. If we come towards the last part of the module, we'll be discussing about how to create more employment. As we have already said that in our country, most of the people are engaged in agriculture, but it is contributing very less in the GDP. So most of the people are suffering from disguised unemployment, and or we can say they are underemployed. So if we want the development in our country, we have to provide employment to the people. So where we can adjust these people, one way can be that to develop the skill among these people. It is a lengthy process. It will take much time. But right now we have to provide them employment. So what can be the way? The very first point given is promotion of irrigation activity. As I have already said that most of the people are engaged in agriculture, and Indian agriculture is highly dependent upon monsoon, which is very irrelevant. Sometimes it comes much before the expectation, sometimes it is very late. Sometimes the amount of rainfall is so high that it brings the floods. Many times it is so less that it brings the drought. Overall, the people who are engaged in agriculture are affected. They are not getting the proper employment. So the remedy is if we can provide the irrigation activities. If proper irrigation activities are provided, these people can be employed in their farms, in their agriculture land throughout the years. They can go for the Kharif season, they can go for the Rabi season, and they can also enjoy the Jaid season. So they will be employed throughout the year, and that will lead to the increase in production also. So the very first point is if we can promote irrigation activities, we can somewhere put control on the disguised unemployment. The second thing is government can invest in transportation and storage. Two major problems that our agriculture faces is even if there is a high amount of production, because most of the production is done in the rural areas, all the people are producers themselves, so that reduces the prices. All the people are engaged in production, but nobody is engaged in consumption. Or even if the consumption is there, they are consuming their own material. So they don't fetch money. Most of the consumption or most of the demand is there in the urban areas. So there must be a link between the urban area and the rural area, and that will be provided by the transportation. So if a proper transportation network is developed, it will provide you good money for your production, and definitely it will require some people who will be indulging in the work of transportation. You will be requiring the drivers, you will be requiring the cleaners, you will be requiring the helpers. So you can generate new forms of employment of those people who will be indulging in transportation, and you will be providing better prices for the goods which will be produced by the primary sector or which will be produced by the agriculture. Second thing is storage. Whenever the crops are harvested, there is much supply in the market, but there is not met with enough demand, and that reduces the prices. The demand is going to rise, but it will be later on. So there is a need to develop the storage facilities. Our farmers are lacking the storage facility. They have to immediately sell their products, and that leads to black marketing and hoarding. So if proper storage facilities are provided in the rural areas, if proper transportation facilities are provided in the rural areas, more production will be there. If in agriculture more production and more profit is there, it will attract the people towards agriculture. All those people who are engaged in agriculture, overall their contribution in GDP is going to increase. So that is the second point. Government investment in transportation and storage should increase. The third one, local banks providing easy credit. Going for agriculture, the very first requirement is credit. You have to buy seeds, you have to buy implements, you have to buy fertilizer, you have to buy insecticide, pesticides and various type of things. And for all these things you need capital or credit, money. The people are present in the rural areas who are providing credit, but basically these are the money lenders. Their main aim is not the welfare of the farmers. Their main aim is their exploitation. They want to take away your assets from you. They will be providing you credit, but that will be charging very high interest rate. So if we want the overall growth of agriculture, we have to provide easy credit to the farmers in rural areas. That can be provided by the government banks. The fourth point is promotion and location of industries and services in semi-rural areas, especially industries which are based on agro. The agro-based industries can be developed in the rural areas itself. If the agro-based industries are developed in the rural areas, it will fetch the farmers better prices for their products. And in the industries, there will be generation of employment also. Same with services. If we talk about the services, we can talk about 3 points: the jobs in tourism, the jobs in education, and the jobs in regional craft industries can be there. The people who are residing in the rural areas are very good craftsmen. They can produce a lot of handicrafts. So if these type of craft industries are promoted in the rural areas, Obviously, if we can generate employment for them, if we can develop market for them, they will be self-sustained. They can produce the things and they can contribute in the GDP. Same way, if we talk about education, if we talk about the data given in the book, the Planning Commission estimates that nearly 20 lakh jobs can be created in the education sector alone. And one more data says, the Planning Commission says that if tourism as a sector is improved, every year we can give additional employment to more than 35 lakh people. So these can be some of the ways by which employment can be generated in the rural areas itself, and if the employment is generated in the rural areas itself, less and less number of people will be based on agriculture and the contribution in the GDP will be more. In the next part of the module, we will be discussing about the contribution of organized and unorganized sector and finally the private and public sector. Thank you.